Arrieta's father introduces a new slave, number 11,542, to the family, who will now live with them. The heroine recognizes the slave as Lord Edwin, whose face she saw every night in her dreams, although she couldn't admit it to herself. 2 years ago, Arrieta is bored on the balcony during the ball and looks at the starry sky. The girl extends her hand towards the brightest star and thinks she only has 15 days left to endure here. Arrieta was flooded with memories of her homeland, the village of Filiosh, her aristocratic parents, and her aversion to etiquette. Mom scolds the little heroine for her dirty dress and shoes because the girl only has 1 year left before her debut, and she needs to take care of her appearance. Due to inappropriate behavior, the girl was sent to Aunt Lillian in Lavent. Upon arriving at her aunt's house, Arrieta was afraid she wouldn't get along with her, because they had never met before. Surprisingly, the aunt received the heroine with great hospitality and was delighted to meet her niece. It turned out that the reason for such hospitality was that Aunt Lillian liked to select suitable husbands for her niece at various events. Arrieta returns from the balcony and meets an excited aunt who is looking for a girl to introduce to someone. The heroine meets Countess Welsh and her eldest son Derek, who also attended the celebration. Derek asks the girl how she lives with her aunt and if Arrieta really sings well. The girl sees Derek's disappointment after discovering that the heroine sings without formal training. For herself, Arrieta thinks she didn't live up to the boy's expectations because she is from the village, and it is unlikely that aristocrats will accept her so easily. The heroine wants to find an excuse and leave, but Lord Welsh doesn't listen to her. Instead, he gets distracted by the whispers surrounding him. Arrieta and Derek head towards the source of the noise. The man asks if Redford has arrived. People in the crowd exclaim and admire. A commotion begins. The host of the celebration thanks Lord Edwin for his visit. The heroine pushes through the crowd to see the cause of the commotion and freezes from the embarrassment caused by the gentleman's beauty. A blond man with blue eyes and a tailcoat appears before the girl. The girl thinks he is divinely handsome. Edwin steps forward and stares fixedly at Arrieta, which makes her very embarrassed. Startled, the girl trips on her dress and falls at the gentleman's feet, thinking she looks like an idiot. Lord Edwin asks if everything is all right, and then kneels in front of the heroine and offers her a hand to help her up. Arrieta hesitates, afraid that the boy will mock her and despise her, as Derek recently did. But she still accepts the help and gets up from the floor. After offering help, Lord Redford walks past the girl coldly, as if nothing special had happened. Arrieta faces the image of the boy's impassive face. She thinks it's better to be ridiculed than to feel so insignificant. The heroine suddenly turns around and calls out to the gentleman, who didn't have time to hide in the crowd of guests. Aunt Lillian pulls the girl back, diverting the crowd's attention from the scene. The aunt grabs the heroine by the face and asks if she is okay, how she fell to the floor, and that the girl's disappearance embarrassed Countess Welsh and her son. Arrieta doesn't listen to her aunt, only asks who the tall, blond man who helped her up was. Lillian tells her niece that the boy is Lord Edwin and that there is no need to have senseless feelings for him, because there are many girls like her. The aunt talks about the ancient Redford family, the most distinguished and powerful family in the kingdom. And they are the most distinguished family in Brimdall, after the royal family. Lord Edwin is the heir to this family, and all members of his family are talents widely known for their skills, not just for their wealth. Arrieta is the daughter of a Viscount of the Desert. She is no match for the excellent future Duke of Blue Blood. And she shouldn't even talk to him, because even among aristocrats there is a hierarchy. The heroine asks her aunt who her companion should be then, if an unknown nobleman, or an old count, to correspond to the hierarchy. Arrieta reasons that she can still have a dream and strive for him, despite the prejudices about who is compatible with whom, and who is not. The aunt apologizes and leaves, saying that aspirations are good, but there are goals that cannot be achieved with perseverance. The girl remembers the Lord and doesn't believe he is truly unattainable, like the stars in the sky. The aunt says she will support her niece in everything, and even if the girl is a mischievous rebel, she will always be a precious niece. Arrieta cries in front of her aunt, thinking of Lord Edwin, and realizes she will no longer be able to forget him. Lillian calms the girl by telling her that the world is full of more beautiful people than Lord Edwin, and she herself thinks that her niece will soon forget him. Arrieta travels by carriage with her aunt to the next event, who wonders why her niece hasn't gone to Filiach yet. Because she was eager to return home, and her mother was already waiting for her. Lillian asks if her niece is waiting for Edwin to leave Avante to return home, because she is eager to see him. The heroine says that she really saw the Lord after that fateful night, that she didn't wait behind the Marquise's house, as her aunt suggested, but she really saw him even from afar. Arrieta recalls the day she met Edwin again. It was the day of her debut as an adult, although she doesn't even remember her escort's name. Since then, the heroine has attended every ball to meet the Lord again. But no attempt has been successful. Upon learning that Edwin frequently visits the Marquis of Richconnell, the heroine came to his estate to try her luck again. The heroine wondered if she looked suspicious at the gate, and if the gentleman would come here today. If she should just go back. The sound of hooves is heard, and a luxurious carriage quickly passes in front of the girl's face. Heading towards the estate, Arrieta glimpses the silhouette of the gentleman in the carriage window, his blonde hair, and his tailcoat. The heroine is surprised and happy. She finally saw Lord Edwin. Her journey was not in vain. The aunt stops the girl's story and reminds her that she cannot be with him, and that the pain and depression she went through are meaningless. Arrieta also wants to let go of these feelings. She understands how reckless and ignorant she seems, and that she won't be able to reach someone so far away. However, the girl's emotions are not heard and, on the contrary, intensify, which only worsens her situation. Shortly after, news spread in the city about the engagement of the heir to the Duke of Redford, and the daughter of the Marquis of Rich to him. Now it was clear why the gentleman had been away from the capital for so long, and why he visited the Marquis's house so often, whose family was also prominent. Everyone blessed their marriage except Arrieta, who had no choice but to cry day and night. Aunt Lillian informed the girl's mother of her condition, who came to take her back to Filiach. The heroine's mother hugged her daughter and told her how much everyone missed her, especially Hugo. Arrieta remembered Hugo, her younger brother, who was very attached to her. When her brother accompanied the girl to Laban, he made her promise to write to him about this city and her life in it. The heroine clung to her mother and burst into tears, because the memories of her brother awakened feelings of love in her and nostalgia. Arrieta thought that her first love, although strong and clumsy, ended with a deep scar on her heart, until the Lord appeared in her life again. The heroine sits at a table on her estate, reads a letter that recently arrived by mail, and is surprised by its content. Suddenly, Hugo, cheerful, runs into her room and calls his sister. The girl gets scared, crumples the letter, and yells at her brother to knock before entering, thinking that before he wasn't so unpleasant. Hugo asks about the letter the girl has in her hand, but doesn't want to read it because he thinks Aunt Lillian always writes the same thing, that she wants to come to Filiach. The brother reminds the heroine that she promised to teach him to ride a horse without a saddle, and suggests they start today because the weather is nice. Arrieta reminds the boy that he is under house arrest for breaking a window while testing a new bow. The girl apologizes to her brother and promises to teach him everything he wants when everything is settled. The heroine invites Hugo to teach her to hunt hares with a bow, because she has wanted to learn to shoot for a long time. The boy makes his sister promise and says he is very happy to walk with her again. Like in the past, the heroine remembers that her aunt told her that time heals and that all sadness and depression of the girl will pass with time. Arrieta realizes that she has found a way out of the hole of her feelings, and her heart is healing. The heroine understands that this reminds her of the last days when Lord Edwin left a small but noticeable mark on her heart. During dinner, Arrieta's mother asks if the girl wants to return to Lavante because her aunt misses her. Mom also remembers that social events and balls will start soon, at which it would be good to keep Lillian company. The girl picks at her food and reminds her that she returned only a month ago and wants to spend time in Philiotia. Arrieta's mother offers her daughter and her only for a month because she is already 17 years old. And she needs to think about her plans for the future, about her engagement. The heroine says she is not getting married now, but her mother suggests she look more closely at her potential partners. Hugo hears the horses and realizes that his father, from whom there has been no news for a long time, has arrived. The head of the family is ordering the servants to unload the cart when he notices that his children and his wife, cheerful, run towards him. Arrieta and Hugo laugh at their parents' cooing, who are bored and give in to the feelings that have built up during the separation. The father is in no hurry to enter the house. First, he wants to introduce someone, after which the sound of shackles is heard. The father introduces slave 11,542 to the family and tells them he will live in their house. Hugo notices the surprise on his sister's face and asks if she is okay. The heroine has the floating image of a blonde slave before her eyes and vaguely hears her family calling her name. The girl remembers this morning's letter, which spoke of a strange rumor that had spread throughout the kingdom. Arrieta wakes up and remembers her strange dream about Lord Edwin. The girl tosses and turns in bed, enjoying the fact that she dreamed of the boy in the form of a slave. And he looked different from how she remembered him. The dream was interrupted by Hugo, who brought the girl tea with honey and jam, and asked if she was feeling well, although the girl was surprised that he came to see her so early in the morning. Hugo says it's not morning, but afternoon, and she lost consciousness and fell asleep. Arrieta takes the tea from her brother and asks if she really fainted and wasn't just sleeping. The girl realizes that her father really brought Lord Edwin home as a slave. It wasn't sweet dreams. The heroine bursts into her father's office and asks why Lord Edwin is in Philiosh and not in the capital and why he looks so bad. The father is perplexed about which gentleman she is talking about and why she calls slave 11,542 by name. The heroine's father explains that slaves have serial numbers and are called by them. Arrieta explains that the slave is Lord Edwin, heir to the Duchy of Redford. But her father only laughs because his friend sent him 11,542 as thanks for his service. To convince his daughter that she is right, the father hands her a document tied with a ribbon. The girl looks at the letter with the royal seal and the author's slavery document and realizes that they are authentic. The father tells Arrieta that she is still not fully rested and wishes his daughter a restful sleep and restorative at night. The girl asks who gifted Edwin to them and finds out it is Marquima Knight, who owns a large estate near the capital and is an influential man in the kingdom. Arrieta remembers how she saw the Lord pass by her in a carriage, what feelings she experienced, and wonders what the hell happened to Lord Edwin. For several days, the girl tries to get close to the slave and watches him from behind the haystacks while the boy sweeps the floor. The heroine fears she left a bad impression of herself, so she is afraid to speak directly to Lord Edwin about their past encounter. Arrieta freezes in fear when Hugo puts his hand on her shoulder and asks what his sister is doing. Hugo apologizes for scaring her, and the girl begs him to be quiet so Edwin doesn't notice them. The boy still notices them and turns towards the noise. The girl realizes she can't get away with it and now has to have the conversation she so desired, but which she feared. Hugo doesn't understand his sister's reaction, but attributes it to the fact that she hit her head when she fainted. The boy turned around and noticed the slave Arrieta was hiding from, and she feared his subsequent reaction. Hugo ran out of his hiding place and ran towards the slave because he only wanted to talk to him. And the heroine didn't have time to stop her brother. The boy, although half the size of the slave, arrogantly asked what he was doing here. The slave did not answer. He just looked at the boy. Hugo asked discontentedly, trusting that the boy heard everything perfectly. The boy looked up and saw how empty and cold the slave looked at him. Hugo trembled with fear. His confidence and resolution disappeared. The slave finally said he was working. And Arrieta, looking from the shelter, thought her brother looked like a scared puppy. With his arms crossed, Hugo asked how the slave had been given the room assigned to him. Since it used to be a training room. Edwin remembered a nice but simple room, in which there was a sofa and a discreet bookshelf. Hugo blushed with surprise when the slave said the room was normal. Arrieta, seeing this, remembered that this room was her brother's favorite. Hugo yelled at the slave because people like him are usually not given any room at all. And he shouldn't behave so brazenly, regardless of the quality of the place he was in before. The heroine ran to her brother to stop him and ordered Hugo to apologize to the boy. The boy is perplexed and doesn't understand why he should apologize to the slave. On the contrary, he should ask for forgiveness. Arrieta adores Edwin and apologizes for her brother, saying he is good, just small. Hugo yells at his sister for bowing to a slave, because if their father sees it, he will be very angry. The heroine yells that her brother simply doesn't know who this guy is, and denies that he is slave 11,542. The girl wants to tell Hugo who Edwin is, but is stopped by the thought of whether she can tell him this, since according to the documents, he is indeed a slave. Suddenly, Edwin greets Arrieta and tells her they haven't seen each other in a long time. The boy says this is the first time they have seen each other since the last time he helped her. Arrieta feels flattered that he also remembers their encounter and recalls that scene at the event a year ago. Edwin interrupts the girl's thoughts, saying he remembers their meeting a few days ago, when he first arrived in Philiash. Arrieta feels embarrassed by what she thought to herself, and by the fact that Edwin's first memory of her is her fainting. Edwin says he was the one who carried her to her chambers, because he was the only one at that moment who could do it. The heroine lowers her head and says disappointed that she confused him with someone and that they hadn't really met before. Edwin looks at the girl and tenses up, because he doesn't want anyone to recognize Lord Redford in his slave form. The boy sees the girl smiling, thanking him for his help, and says she is indebted. Although Edwin says that helping is just part of his job, the heroine asks him to inform her if she can provide any service. The boy wants to ask her if the girl knows his case and is already starting to speak when Arrieta interrupts and tells him she needs to run to her mother. Hugo asks if their mother really called her because she is not at home, but his sister silences him by pinching his hand. The girl calls her brother with her and they run away, letting the slave finish the work. But he watches them in stupefaction. Edwin continues to watch the girl with disgust, fear, and anger, now confident that she knows him. Arrieta looks towards the backyard, hoping to see Edwin there, but doesn't find the guy, and goes to look elsewhere. The girl looks around, searching for the boy, and someone approaches her from behind. The stranger startles the heroine by placing his hand on her shoulder. And the girl screams, focused on the search. The girl runs away scared. She sees the slave she was diligently looking for in the yard and accidentally calls him Lord Edwin. The boy apologizes, saying the girl could have fallen. That's why he approached her so unexpectedly. Arrieta feels flattered and blushes, saying the boy scared her, but she is fine. Edwin politely asks if the lady was looking for someone, but she says she was just taking a walk, and decided to go out into the yard. The heroine realizes that, despite the boy's politeness, an oppressive atmosphere emanates from him. It seems to her that she needs to leave, otherwise something bad will happen. Arrieta quickly passes the boy and tells him she won't keep interfering with his work. The slave stops her by grabbing her hand, which greatly frightens the girl, who already had a bad feeling. Without letting go of her hand, Edwin asks, a little embarrassed, if the heroine knows him while trying to break free. The heroine trembles and denies knowing the gentleman. The girl is scared because there is no one nearby. Edwin asked again, squeezing the girl's hand tighter, but she denied everything too. Arrieta yells at the boy to let her go, and with a strong tug, pulls her hand out of captivity. With a strong push, the girl falls to the ground, leaving red marks on her wrist due to Edwin's strong fingers. The heroine, still sitting on the ground, rests her hands on it and trembles, trying to find words. Arrieta looks at Edwin, gets up from the ground, and admits that she knows he was a nobleman. Lord Redford. The girl boldly looks at the slave and asks what he will do now with this information. The boy, in a stupor, realizes that his conjectures were correct, and Arrieta knows his past. Edwin asks her how she found out about him, because in Philiosh, they are not that interested in the outside world. If someone told them. The boy asks another question about whether anyone besides the girl knows who he is, to which he receives a negative answer. The girl backs away as Edwin advances and says that at first he didn't trust who sent him here, asking about this person's hidden motives. In the end, the girl finds herself trapped against the wall, with no way to escape the approaching slave. The boy stops and asks with a smile if the heroine wants him to crawl like a dog in front of her. Edwin continues to ask if he can drug himself and satisfy Arrieta's desires until she understands what he means. The slave completely pressed the lady against the wall, took her chin, and asked her to stop trembling so he could attract her. The heroine keeps trembling and says she doesn't understand what the boy is talking about. Edwin gets so close to her that it's easy to kiss her and asks her to choose more effective drugs. Because, although under his influence they all look the same, the heroine is not his type. Arrieta forcefully pushes the boy away and yells at him to stop talking about such things. The girl is terrified, trembles, and asks what terrible thing the boy wanted to do to her. Edwin is surprised that the heroine is still playing innocent. He doesn't understand why she reacts so strongly. Arrieta starts crying and asks what happened to the highest nobleman she knew. Sobbing, the girl wonders why Lord Edwin became what he is now. A perverted and terrifying slave. The boy thinks and wonders how he became a slave, what happened to him, and tells his story. Edwin remembers the rich woman who hugged him, beaten and in rags, and enjoyed how long she hugged him. The hero remembers how his father was killed by a guillotine, and how this woman said it was very funny. Kneeling, chained, Edwin awaited his fate in horror. The guy was sweating profusely, and then he heard a voice calling him by name and saying that Edwin must continue to live. The hero remembers the prince who told him to live and repent for his family's actions, to suffer for his indelible sin against the kingdom, because that is the only thing he can do now. After being accused of treason, all people with the surname Redford were destroyed. Except Edwin. The boy was saved thanks to many factors, one of which was his close friendship with the prince. Kneeling in front of the prince, tied up, the hero asked why he was saved, and begged him to kill him. The prince, who had been looking out the window before, finally turned and said that Edwin should fight for life. He explains that Edwin's death should be the end of the Redford family story. Edwin hears from someone who was once a good friend that the Redford family wanted him to choose this path, the path of redemption. So the hero lost his rank and surname. He no longer existed as a lord. The boy changed his name to 11,542, the date of the beginning of his new life. But still, he was not sure about the correctness of his actions. It seemed to him that life was devouring him inside and out. When Edwin was heir to the duchy, people showed him nothing but smiles. The moment the hero became a slave, the same people instantly changed and attacked him. Mental exhaustion and physical pain were not as difficult as the humiliation and the coldness that Edwin felt. Every day, the guy dreamed of taking revenge on these people, who turned out to be worse than cattle. But more often, he wanted to commit suicide. The prince's words about the duty of the Redfords to the kingdom often appeared in Edwin's head. They penetrated his head like a curse. Over time, the former lord no longer understood who was to blame, whether the people or him, and confused thoughts forced him to resign himself to fate. Edwin ended his story by saying that if people wanted to destroy his soul, they succeeded. He almost forgot who he was before. The hero sees Arrieta crying in front of him, and doubts arise that she is one of those rotten people. Finally recovering, the girl says she saw Lord Edwin at a ball in Lavant. The heroine says that the boy shone brighter at the ball than anyone else she had ever met in her life. Thanks to him, the girl realized how strong, beautiful, outstanding, and unprecedented a person can be. Arrieta concludes that the boy was more wonderful than a star falling from the night sky. She could not forget her amazement at the first meeting. and no one at that time would say that Lord Edwin deserved all these feelings and praise. Because he was wonderful. Arrieta says she knew from her aunt that he had been having some problems lately. But before they met, she was sure that everything was fine with the Lord. Edwin looks at the girl's sincere gaze and realizes that she wasn't looking at him because she had a hidden plan. The boy froze and realized that the girl simply had a genuinely pure heart. She never wanted to hurt him. Edwin looks down ashamed and realizes how rude he was to her recently with words about pleasing him and using him like a dog. The boy looks at the lady and thinks that the girl now hates and despises him. But she has the right to this. He must endure any punishment. Suddenly, the girl adores Edwin and tells him she regrets acting like that. Edwin is very surprised and waits to hear what she will say next. He still expects a reaction to his rudeness. Arrieta cries without lifting her head and apologizes for thinking he was living a happy life and not knowing the pain he went through. The girl cries because she thought Edwin was living well, and she was the one who encountered a cruel reality when she knew nothing. The lady asks for forgiveness from the bottom of her heart, and the slave thinks she has no reason to do so. Arrieta cannot stop crying, because what they did to Lord Edwin is very cruel. The whole town told Edwin that he deserved all his torment, and he didn't even know why they were doing it. Therefore, the hero is now surprised that a strange girl cries so much for his sake. Edwin continued to watch Arrieta break down in tears and cover her mouth with her hands. During the day, there were several good stallions in the stable, one of which was being cared for by Arrieta. The girl looked surprised at her brother who entered the stable, who couldn't say if he arrived alone or accompanied. Hugo slowly approaches his sister, who is brushing her horse and doesn't understand what the boy is talking about. The brother shows up and says with displeasure that lately the slave has started to stand out more often. Arrieta really sees Edwin behind her and understands that he arrived recently, because she didn't see him when she arrived. Not to bother her brother, Arrieta returns to the horse and tells him that Hugo has made a decision. Since they have a small house, it would be strange not to see each other so often. Hugo glances at the slave and says this is not an accident because he was watching the slave. The boy says he only sees the boy when he is with Arrieta, and when he is alone, he doesn't pay attention to him. Hugo demonstrates that even the place where Edwin is now cleaning was already cleaned by the maid Anna. The ground is clean. The heroine believes that she also suspected that the slave was interested in her, and her brother only fueled her imagination. To definitively convince her brother that he was wrong, the girl says that they simply asked Edwin to clean there again. Arrieta began to avoid the boy after their conversation, but not because she didn't like him. The girl was afraid that he would feel uncomfortable with her. The heroine thought this because Edwin had already suffered harassment and violence before coming to them, and she hoped to stay out of his sight to make him more comfortable. Hugo still had his doubts, but his sister threatened to leave him at home if he didn't stop talking nonsense. The brother and sister left the stable on horseback. The heroine ordered Hugo to obey her. Otherwise, she wouldn't take him with her. Arrieta reasons that Hugo is still a child, because he is only 10 years old, and for her, he will always be so. The rider passed by the slave when she saw that he had stopped working and was looking at her intently. The girl smiled awkwardly and bowed, thinking that he was looking at her like that because he had never seen her dressed for riding before. The heroine didn't stay long and rode with her brother on horseback towards the forest to start the riding lesson. Edwin watched them thoughtfully, annoyed that he didn't have time to say anything. Hugo, riding a rearing horse, chased a white rabbit from the forest towards his sister. In fact, the rabbit ran towards Arrieta, who had already prepared a bow and arrows for it. The heroine took the arrow and, saying she was a good shot, pulled the string. The girl carefully aimed at the fast-running target and lowered the arrow towards the rabbit. The arrow hit right in front of the animal, and it escaped. The girl thought the arrows were too old for a good house. Hugo quickly rode his horse behind the rabbit to guide it towards his sister. She chased after him. Arrieta yelled at her brother not to ride alone, but the boy didn't listen. And the girl simply chased the horse. The heroine noticed that they had gone too deep into the forest and invited her brother to return to the edge. The girl saw where her brother's horse was running and yelled at him to stop. But Hugo didn't listen to her. Finally, the boy turned around and asked his sister what the problem was, why she was yelling so much. At that moment, the rabbit fell into a large hole that Hugo didn't see. Hugo didn't have time to stop the horse and ran right behind the rabbit towards the cliff. Arrieta sped up her horse towards her brother as a plan matured in her head. Having caught up with her brother, the girl pushed her brother's horse and fell off the horse into the hole instead of him. Hugo was horrified by what happened and didn't know what to do now. Arrieta flew into a deep hole right in front and behind him. Hugo called his sister from the pit, but the girl lost consciousness from a blow to the head. The boy, with tears in his eyes, hears that his sister is making sounds, and is glad that she started making sounds. Arrieta holds her head with her hand and thinks that the slime in the hole cushioned her fall well. Having regained consciousness, the girl jumps up and yells at her brother that he won't be fine when she gets out, because he didn't listen to her, and Hugo is willing to do anything to get his sister out of the hole safely. The heroine examines the hole and realizes that the ground is soft due to recent rain, and it won't be easy to get out. Arrieta tells her brother that she needs tools to climb, like ropes or, in extreme cases, stems or vines. Hugo looks around but finds nothing. His sister reasons that the vines won't support her weight anyway, and her brother won't be able to hold them. The heroine invites Hugo to return to the village and bring ropes or ask someone from the people for help. Hugo says it will be dangerous for his sister to stay alone in the forest and that it is better for him to stay. Arrieta scares her brother by telling him that if nothing is done, both of them will be devoured by local wolves at night. Hugo is scared, but still heads to the village to return with help before it's too late. The girl hears a noise nearby and, leaning against the pit wall, hopes it's not her father coming with Hugo. The heroine takes a step and feels pain in her ankle, remembering that her parents are not interested in her being out late. If the parents find out what today's outing led to, they will take away her bow and arrows because they want more feminine hobbies for their daughter. In the end, the girl sits on the ground and realizes that in this position, she has no other choice. Her gaze falls on the rabbit sleeping next to her. The girl didn't believe she was in so much trouble because of the bunny. Time passed. Arrieta shivered from the cold and hoped that Hugo had reached the village without problems. Although the village is close to the forest, finding the way can be difficult. And although Hugo seems older than his age, he is only a child. The heroine imagines fierce wolves because recently a villager was attacked by a pack. More time passed, the girl was freezing and was even more worried about her brother. And about herself. Arrieta heard a rhythmic noise from above, like a horse galloping on the grass. The heroine was glad that the people brought by her brother had finally arrived. And she started calling Hugo so they could find her quickly. Shouts came from the well, but there was no reaction. No strange sounds were heard in the empty forest anymore. The girl was upset because the sounds were apparently made by some animal, and no one came to save her. Arrieta took off her gloves and rolled up the sleeves of her suit, deciding that she could no longer sit idly by. Alternately sticking sticks into the soft earth of the well walls, the girl quickly climbed to the top. Seeing the top of the well and the forest, Arrieta was glad she hadn't lost. When the heroine had almost climbed out, the stick under the girl's foot broke and she flew down. Arrieta screamed as she fell and despaired of getting out of this terrible well. The girl's hand was caught by a strong man's hand from somewhere above, and it stopped the girl's fall. The girl opened her eyes, raised her head, and was surprised to see her savior. The assistant turned out to be Lord Edwin and said he would answer all the ladies' questions later. The boy says he will now get the heroine out and take her out of the hole. While the girl tries to catch her breath, Edwin is nearby and asks if the lady is injured. Arrieta is still surprised and asks how the slave knew she fell into the hole. And the slave says that Hugo told him about the problem. The girl feels relieved that her brother reached the village safely and is not injured. Edwin saddles the lady's horse and tells her they must get home quickly because it will be dark soon. The boy notices that the girl is limping on one leg as she walks towards the horse. Edwin asks why the heroine didn't say she was injured when he asked about it. The hero approaches Arrieta and sits down in front of her feet. The slave takes off the lady's high boot and examines the girl's swollen and raised leg. Arrieta feels embarrassed. Her heart beats even faster because she still remembers her feelings for the Lord. The heroine screams because Edwin is squeezing her leg too hard, but the boy can't do anything because her ankle is swollen. The boy concludes that the bones are intact, but the ankle is sprained. The lady needs to rest and stop overworking. After the girl says that Edwin is not a doctor and cannot be sure, the boy looks up and says he has seen enough minor injuries. The couple heads towards the village. Arrieta is sitting on a horse, and a slave leads her by the reins. Both heroes break the silence by starting to say something at the same time, and Edwin convinces the lady to speak first. Arrieta smiles and thanks the boy for today and for his help in their first meeting. The lady says she is embarrassed to thank him so often, but she is very grateful. The girl states that the slave can ask her for help, even though she has no influence or physical strength. Edwin asks if the heroine always puts herself in danger, and receives the answer that Arrieta simply loves outdoor activities. Unlike the young ladies in the capital. The boy stops when the girl asks him what he wanted to ask when they were interrupted. Seeing the slave's embarrassment, Arrieta convinces him that he doesn't need to tell her if it's difficult for him. Edwin turns shyly and asks if the heroine is angry about the day he was rude to her, and if she feels uncomfortable seeing him. The guy says he wants to apologize properly to the lady while she sits on her horse in a stupor. The slave convinces Arrieta that he leaves it up to her to accept or not accept his apologies, and that he will understand if she is displeased. He believes he deserves to be hated for all his mistakes, and he will stay out of her way if the lady wishes so. The girl interrupts Edwin and tells him she doesn't understand what the boy is talking about, and why he would want her to avoid him. The boy says that she herself didn't want to see him in recent days, and decided that she was against him being near. The heroine appears because the slave completely misunderstood her intentions. She thought that, on the contrary, he felt uncomfortable with her, which is why she kept her distance. Edwin is sincerely surprised and doesn't understand why she thought that. What actions of his contributed to this? The slave tells the lady that she was completely wrong about his feelings. Arrieta lights up and asks what the boy means by of course. Of course he felt uncomfortable, or of course she was wrong about it. Edwin grabbed the reins in his hands and said that he himself was not sure what was on his mind. And he remembered how Hugo talked about him in the stable. The heroine brings her hand to her mouth and asks if Edwin was sad because he thought she was avoiding him. The slave turns around and briefly answers negatively, but still doesn't give a reason. The already cheerful Arrieta keeps hinting that the boy wanted to know what she was thinking, and apologized to him, but Edwin denies everything. The girl, smiling, looks at the boy and thinks that, after all, she was right. From behind, the slave's ears can be seen, red with shame, which show all his deception. Autumn and winter passed, and finally spring came to Philiosh to refresh nature before the hot summer. A cheerful Arrieta looks out the house window and greets Edwin with a wave of her hand. The boy is amazed, and the girl's father yells at her not to do that, because it's dangerous. The heroine says she will come down to them now, and Edwin continues to look at her with embarrassment. While the slave works, Arrieta stays behind him and asks if he wants to talk to her. The lady pulled the boy by the edge of his vest so that he would finally pay attention, and asked him to look at her. Edwin turns around and asks if Arrieta has 10 lives. The boy says the girl must have many lives if she constantly runs such risks by jumping out the window. Arrieta tries to convince him that she is not small and that nothing will happen to her. She didn't fall out the window. Edwin shakes his head and reminds her how she got lost in the forest. She fell off the horse while jumping from the saddle and cut her finger trying to chop vegetables faster. The heroine admits her guilt and the boy's reasoning and promises to be more careful. The boy reminds her how many times she promised and the embarrassed lady says she will be very careful. The slave thinks she will still get into trouble because of her habits, not today or tomorrow. The boy remembers her sweet face on a horseback ride and realizes that he is letting the girl go with impunity. Arrieta enthusiastically asks if Edwin is still angry with her and asks him to tell her that she is forgiven. The hero tenderly says he believes her, but he himself thinks it is impossible for him not to fall for her little tricks. During dinner, Arrieta and Hugo secretly fight over the last piece of bacon left on the table. The heroine's concentration is interrupted by her father, who asks her where she has been since he hasn't seen her in the house. The girl ignores that she was at home the whole time and did nothing special. The father notices that this is strange, because the only time he sees her is during meals. Hugo, who stole the coveted bacon, says his sister spends time in a certain place in the house. The boy cuts bacon and tells the family that Arrieta spends time in the stables, or the warehouse, places his father doesn't go. The heroine's mother asks her if she still communicates with 11,542 and receives a positive answer. The woman says her daughter should communicate less with the slave, but the father notes that 11,542 remains good. The father says the slave's words are surprisingly polished, he looks bright, and he regrets that such a person was born a slave. Mom grabs her head and reminds her that Arrieta is already 18, and it's time to get married. Mom reminds her of the girl's debut 2 years ago, but since her daughter stays home, she won't have boyfriends. Arrieta tries to reassure her parents by telling them it doesn't matter what time she gets married. She would live peacefully in Philosophy with her parents. The mother asks her daughter to listen to her and explains that the girl cannot always live with her parents. The parents believe the heroine should leave her home to start her own family. But Arrieta protests. Mom stops the heroine because getting married is good for her own safety. The heroine clenches her fists when told she has already been given enough freedom, and that she doesn't want to give it up. The father, after asking what his wife intends to do with Arrieta at that moment, and upon learning that she intends to send her to Lavante with Aunt Lillian, he considers it a bad idea. Then, the mother offers to send her daughter to the capital instead of Lavante, just to find a boyfriend. Finally, Arrieta's opinion is sought, who sits horrified at the table, unable to eat after such news. The sound of an axe was heard in the backyard. Someone was chopping wood. The maids gossiped about 11,542's beautiful voice and physique while watching the boy work. Arrieta stealthily approached behind the girls and asked who they were talking about. The heroine sees Edwin covered in sweat and wonders if they are talking about him. The maids deny everything and quickly flee the yard, avoiding unnecessary questions from the lady. The girl approaches the slave, thinking that any clairvoyant person would be shocked by his beauty. Arrieta sat on the ground in front of Edwin and heavily rested her head on her hands over her knees. Seeing the girl's emotion, the boy approached and asked if she was okay. The heroine silently looked at the boy, remembering her mother's words that she should stay away from the slave. Arrieta believes she clung to Edwin so much that she herself would get tired of someone so clingy. The girl understands that he doesn't show irritation directly and cannot understand the slave's thoughts. What if he would only be happy if she stopped following his heels? Edwin knelt beside the girl and called her, pulling her out of her tense thoughts. Arrieta looked at the boy, and he asked her if she could answer the question he asked earlier. The lady realized with horror that, although she had admired Lord Redford, she did not want him to be unhappy at all. The girl brought her hand to Edwin's cheek and thought that, being a lord, he wouldn't even look at someone like her. Arrieta feels disgusted with herself for feeling selfishly relieved when he is with her. Edwin runs his hand through his hair and says it has grown too long and needs to be cut today. Remembering how the maids praised Edwin's hair, the lady tells the slave to postpone the cut. The hero is surprised by the news that the girl will go to see her Aunt Elavant tomorrow. Arrieta says that Aunt Lillian is a childless widow and feels lonely, so she wants to see her niece as soon as possible. Edwin doesn't know what to say, so he stays there and listens to the girl's story. The heroine reassures the boy by telling him that she won't be with her aunt for long. Only 3 or 4 months, and maybe she'll be back before the fall. Arrieta says how worried her mother is about her daughter not having a fiancé. But the girl herself thinks that nothing will change regarding a trip to a Levante. The heroine remembers how she wasted time last time, like a lonely flower on the wall. Edwin imagines that if Arrieta finds her passion in the band, she might not return to Filioch. The girl is surprised by this statement and asks the boy not to dismiss her so early, even if he is tired of her. Arrieta smiles awkwardly and wonders what kind of crazy gentleman would want to marry someone like her. After all, there will be many beautiful and elegant ladies around him at the balls. And her partner doesn't immediately become a boyfriend, so the heroine will return in any case. The lady asks smugly if Edwin is happy to be free of her attention for a while. With a sad smile, Arrieta adds that the boy shouldn't relax too much, because it will sadden her to see him live happily ever after. Edwin wants to say something, but he is too upset to formulate his thoughts correctly. All the slave gives is a request to the para to be careful on the road. Arrieta closes her eyes and says that when the leaves turn red, they will definitely see each other. Edwin sits thoughtfully on the sofa in his room and remembers how he ended up in Filioch. In the boy's memories, Marquima Knight asked him not to be offended by His Highness, because he had his share of cruelty. The Marquis promised that Edwin's affairs would go better in Filioch, because at least there he would not be recognized. The slave thinks the king is wrong and nothing will change. The evil nobles will continue to mock him. The only difference is the level of pain. Edwin remembered how Arrieta, on a horseback ride, said she was very lucky that he was with her now, and that the boy was the main success of her life. The hero rubs his hands, repeating aloud the girl's words about luck, and recalling their conversation during the day. Edwin repeats in his head the lady's speech that she will only waste time in Lavend, because no one will want to marry someone like her. The boy sees Arrieta's image again and how she calls him by name, because this shortens the distance between them. The slave feels ashamed of these memories and realizes why he doesn't want the lady to leave Filiocha. Arrieta sits in the warehouse and pretends to read a book, but she is actually spying on Edwin. The boy realizes this and, without turning around, asks what the heroine needs from him. The heroine claims she is just reading a book, because a true reader doesn't care where to read. Edwin realizes that the lady is holding the book upside down, but even here the heroine excuses herself by saying that most people read it that way. Arrieta changes the subject and asks if the boy wants her to cut his hair, even though she forbade it herself. The hero sat on one of the barn boxes, and the heroine began to check his locks to cut his hair. The girl stopped after cutting only one lock and told Edwin that she had finished faster than she had planned. Having hidden what she had cut behind her back, Arrieta quickly left so as not to answer the slave's questions. Upon reaching her room, the girl slammed the door shut and exhaled that she had avoided meeting someone from the house. Arrieta put a lock of Edwin's hair in the pendant and regretted being ashamed to ask him herself, as a sign of the lady's departure from home. Looking at the pendant, the girl thought she might stay in the van for more than 3 or 4 months. The heroine looks out the window at her house's yard, not believing she will have to leave when Lord Edwin is here. The real Edwin turned out to be significantly different, in contrast to her dreams. Just as handsome, but no longer a prince on a white horse. Arrieta points out that despite all the torment she has experienced, the boy always takes care of her. Edwin sat in the warehouse with his hair down, looking at his hands and listening to his heartbeat. The heroine squeezed the pendant and imagined she was talking to the Lord, but could not say anything other than his name. As the family sees Arrieta off on her trip, Hugo asks his sister to remember to write letters home. The girl tells her brother to obey their parents and not get into trouble. But the boy says that without her, there will be no trouble. Mom asks the heroine to be careful in the band and convey her regards to Aunt Lillian. And her daughter wishes her parents health. Before getting into the carriage, the girl turns to see Edwin one last time. The heroine only sees the butler and a couple of maids saying goodbye to the lady. The carriage left Filioch, and the girl's house remained behind and in the past. And somewhere there was a slave who had not said goodbye to the girl. Night fell. The carriage continued along the road in some forest. Arrieta looked out the window, hoping the trip wouldn't be long, because she was tired from the day on the road. The coachman stopped the carriage and said they would spend the night at a traveler's house. Not as good as a hotel, but with everything necessary. The heroine panics at having to spend the night in some house in the forest. The girl got out of the carriage and is horrified by the place where she will have to spend the night today. The coachman asks the lady to quickly enter the house because it is cold. And he enters the building first. Arrieta turns at a strange sound and sees a cart with her things and two porters hired by her father. Without taking her eyes off the men, the girl wonders why her not very rich family sent more than one assistant with her. In the end, the heroine decided not to think too much and simply went to the traveler's house. In bed, Arrieta couldn't sleep because of the cold and dreamed of a cup of hot tea. The heroine realized that she had taken tea leaves from Filioch and that they should be in the cart. The girl went out and started looking for tea in the cart, but didn't find it. As soon as Arrieta saw the box with tea leaves, someone in a black robe appeared behind her. The boy grabbed the girl from behind and covered her mouth with his hand so that the girl would wake up the servant by screaming. Looking up, the heroine saw Edwin, apologizing for having scared the lady. Arrieta turns to look at the boy and asks him several times if it's really him. The heroine brings Edwin's face close to hers and makes sure it is definitely a slave. The boy says he is not in Philiotia because he will accompany the lady in the band. The girl thinks that Edwin himself would avoid large cities, given his background. So he couldn't volunteer for the trip. Arrieta, annoyed, says that the father should have asked the slave's opinion before sending him somewhere, and respected the boy's opinion. The girl apologizes for her father and says that he is not usually like that. She herself does not understand his decisions. The heroine returns to the house and promises to talk to her father, and Edwina is sent back to Filioch. The boy stops the girl by the hand and tells her that he is not going against her will, but by his own choice. Edwin, annoyed, asks the lady not to send him back. But the girl reminds him that he might be recognized in Lavant. The boy says he doesn't care about people because there is something more important. The slave says that the most important thing for him is Lady Arrieta. But the girl thinks he is just calling her by name. Edwin, relieved that the girl didn't understand, says he didn't mean anything important. Arrieta arrived in Lavante, and the servants of her aunt's estate helped her unload her luggage. Lillian ran out to greet her niece and asked why she hadn't visited her aunt in 2 years. The heroine, already pressed against her aunt's chest, remembered that she was the one who promised to go to Filio's. The aunt asks if the movers she brought will stay with the girl, and finds out that only the blonde one will stay. Lillian thoughtfully looks at the slave carrying boxes with the lady's decorations. Arrieta puts her hands on her chest, hoping her aunt didn't recognize Lord Edwin in the boy. The aunt concludes that the slave will need a room and orders him to be placed in the servant's bedroom. The heroine exhales and thanks her aunt for her kindness to the servant. Lavante was famous for its aristocratic parties. They were considered the most important in the kingdom, and many wealthy people came from the capital just to attend them. Arrieta, sitting in the hallway, says annoyed that she will soon have to accompany her aunt to a local countess's party to network and find a boyfriend. Edwin, sitting opposite, says this is wonderful, which surprises the lady because she doesn't understand what is good about the ball. The boy reasons that at the countess's birthday party, most of the guests should be women, and Arrieta can learn manners from them. The heroine is startled because the slave, in her opinion, is slandering her to her face. The girl asks if Edwin thinks she is stupid, but the boy doesn't understand why she decided that. Arrieta clasps her hands in her lap and asks if the boy cares about her behavior, if he thinks she will disgrace the family. Remembering that the slave always criticized her, the girl asks him to forget the previous questions because the boy still has a wrong idea about her. Crossing her arms over her chest, Arrieta says that if she wants, she can surprise Edwin with her ideal lady behavior. The hero says that the lady is already ideal for him, but the girl doesn't understand what he means, and asks again. Edwin, looking at the girl, repeats that Lady Arrieta, in his opinion, is ideal, so there is no need to remind him. The girl asks how she can be perfect if he himself just said she needs to learn manners. To which he receives the answer that the slave only needed to give her a reason. Arrieta looks surprised at the boy, who said he wished the lady would never change. Remembering how the girl smiled sincerely at him, Edwin sadly clarifies that he doesn't want to see changes in the girl for as long as possible. Broken by the idea that Arrieta will soon get married, the boy says it's impossible for her not to change. The heroine, frightened by the boy's state, asks him if he is okay. And what he meant. Edwin raised his head to the lady and asked her to forget what he was talking about a minute ago. In front of him, the boy saw an embarrassed girl in a house dress, and his heart began to beat faster seeing her. At the Countess's birthday, the women discussed how good the mistress's son was. It's a shame he's single. Lillian turns to the heroine, who wasn't even listening to the conversation, and reveals to her that she is also single. The girl looks at the tea in the cup and wonders what Edwin meant during the conversation that night. Arrieta takes a sip of tea and concludes that the Lord's words strongly resemble a declaration of sympathy. The ladies returned to Lillian's estate, which was not much larger than the heroine's house in Filjash. Arrieta reasons that there is not a drop of nobility in her, so Edwin, who was the noblest of all, cannot like her. The girl is running. Suddenly, the boy said this because he knows he is attractive to her, but he cannot find the answer to this riddle. The heroine suddenly leaves her room, determined to interrogate Edwin. When Arrieta approaches the backyard, she hears the maids arguing about whether they should approach the handsome boy. The maids decide that the slave is too handsome for them, and approaching him would be instant shame. The heroine stands still and realizes that she recently saw a similar scene at home. Finally, the girl sees Edwin standing in the middle of the yard, sweating and with his hair down. Arrieta draws the maids' attention, scares them, and asks why they are not working. The girls ask again, and the heroine remembers that now is the busiest time. The maids flee while Arrieta stares at them, arms crossed over her chest. Edwin says he thought for a second that this was not the lady he knew, and the girl wonders if he was disappointed. The boy reports that he was afraid the lady would also scold him, and Arrieta asked him not to scold him. The heroine is angry because Edwin continues to tease her when she asked him to stop, and warns that she is terribly angry. The boy calmly says he will stop harassing if the lady wishes so, which surprises the girl. Arrieta sighs frustratedly because the truth cannot overcome the boy in anything. Edwin was upset that the girl didn't see an opportunity to overcome him even once in her life. The heroine approaches the boy and says she wants to ask him something, but stops. Arrieta imagines how stupid she will look asking him if Edwina likes him. In the girl's mind, the boy will look at her with disgust because she doesn't look like a lunatic. Edwin approached the lady to pull her out of her thoughts into the real world and find out what she wanted to know. The girl's embarrassed gaze falls on the boy's unbuttoned shirt and the manly chest underneath it, and the heroine becomes even more ashamed. Arrieta blushed thinking about what it would be like to be in Edwin's arms. The boy asked if the girl was okay, and she came to her senses and was horrified by what she was doing in front of the slave. To avoid silence, Arrieta blurted out the question of why she hadn't seen Edwin lately. Because she is worried that something happened to him. The boy reminds her that he stays away from the girl because Lillian might recognize him if they see each other often. The heroine understands how stupid her question was and doesn't remember how she could have forgotten such an important reason for a slave to hide. The girl says it's not that she doesn't see Edwin, but her question. Edwin declared that he was finally ready to listen to the lady's question. But she was afraid to immediately say that she was ready to faint or fall into a hole just to get away from this conversation. A month had passed since Arrieta's arrival in Levante, during which time she had attended several balls and small gatherings with her aunt. Each time, Lillian tried to introduce her niece to numerous single gentlemen. Thanks to her efforts, 3 men showed interest in the heroine. However, after several meetings with Arrieta, they lost interest and Lillian didn't understand what the problem was. One of the suitors told his aunt that the girl was not at all interested in him. All the time they spent together, the heroine thought about something else. Her reaction to conversations was quite distant. Arrieta tried to justify to her aunt that these guys were nice, but none caught her eye. The aunt takes the girl by the shoulders and tells her she is in no position to find fault with them, because few people marry for love. The heroine says she doesn't want to marry an unloved person and would rather live alone. Arrieta stands by the tree while Edwin sweeps the floor and says her aunt is upset, and that it's her fault because the girl couldn't concentrate on the gentleman when they arrived. Edwin doesn't understand his guilt and continues working, but the girl says she won't be able to escape. The heroine remembers that the boy always interfered in her meetings with her boyfriends, saying that a letter had arrived from Filios or that her aunt was not well. The boy also hinted that the lady had something on her face, that her back knot was untied. And that's why Arrieta was very tense in her conversation with the gentleman. The girl, crossing her arms over her chest, asked how she should have behaved with them in such situations. Edwin coldly replied that if the men couldn't handle this, they couldn't handle the women's character either. Arrieta opens her mouth at the boy's impudence, but cannot object. When asked why the hero behaves this way, is he having fun or competing with them? He replies that he is simply greedy. The next day, the girl enters her room and something catches her eye. On the edge of the coffee table is a white envelope with a red seal sent by the heroine's father. Arrieta takes the letter and sits on the sofa, wondering what new things could happen in Filiach. After reading the unpleasant message, the girl doesn't want to believe that what her father wrote is true. The heroine runs into Edwin's room and asks to speak with him urgently. Arrieta shows the letter from Filiach and invites the boy to familiarize himself with its contents. Edwin closes his eyes sadly and says he knows what this letter is about. The girl screams that it turns out the father didn't send the boy to a Levante, but he simply ran away, alarming the whole family. Arrieta screams that a person with a slave mark cannot move freely. And Edwin knows it well, and it is very dangerous to appear as a fugitive. According to the letter, they hadn't seen Edwin for some time, and the family was worried. The heroine's father, given his daughter's good relationship with him, mustered the courage to write to him about this. Arrieta thought Edwin was sent by her father, because he told her he came with her by his own choice. The heroine couldn't even imagine that he had run away. The heroine shouted at the boy to say something about this. The girl threw the crumpled letter on the floor, and it fell near the slave's feet. Arrieta began to cry and covered her face with her hands, repeating that she didn't understand why Edwin would do something so reckless. The hero wanted to touch the lady's hair, but stopped and withdrew his hand. Edwin knows that for escaping at best, his hand will be cut off and at worst, he will be beheaded. The guy is still subject to Brimdell's laws because, deep down, he considers himself the last surviving Redford. Edwin was trained as the heir to a family loyal and devoted to the kingdom, and was taught from childhood to love his country. Even when the boy lost everything and fell to his knees, he followed the prince's last order without argument. But at the same time, he refused to follow those who called what happened unjust, and extended a friendly hand to him. Usually, Edwin's emotions did not dominate his reason, except at the moment when Arrieta was about to leave for Avante. From the moment he met the lady, the boy forgot what it was like to be himself. Edwin remembered with what joy the girl called him by name and understood that he did not want to be forgot and lose Arrieta. The boy silently looks at the angry girl, thinking that escaping is his own desire, and not the personality of Redford. When the heroine looks at the slave, she realizes that she wants to stay close to him, no matter the price she has to pay. They stood there in silence, because Edwin, as a slave, could not convey his feelings to Arrieta, no matter how much he wanted to. The heroine looks at a bouquet of blue flowers in a vase by the window and thinks that the boy hasn't brought them in a week. The girl leaves the room and is moved to see a violet flower brought by a slave on the threshold. Arrieta approaches Edwin, who is sitting by a tree, and tells him that flowers are not enough because she would like to see him. The girl smiles, thinking that if this happens again, she will give him a sad life. The boy, sitting on the grass, admires the heroine in a simple house dress. The aunt runs to Arrieta with an invitation to Count Shank's grand plan. Lillian informs that it's time to throw away the old dresses and has already agreed with the tailor to take her niece's measurements to sew a new dress. The heroine wanted to refuse, but her aunt did not allow it because the ball would be full of beautiful and young gentlemen. Already sitting in the carriage, the girl thought how much it cost her aunt to order a dress for her. Edwin stopped the coachman by closing the carriage door and asked where the lady was going. Arrieta says her aunt is sending her to the city to take measurements to sew a dress. The boy suddenly asks if he can go with the heroine to personally make sure she is safe. The girl laughs and says she is going to a clothing store, not a battlefield. Edwin silently awaits the lady's answer. His face shows that the refusal does not suit him. Understanding the boy's stubbornness, Arrieta invites him to sit next to her if he doesn't complain of boredom. Edwin gets into the carriage and accepts the terms, and the girl notices that he looks like a puppy. The carriage arrived in the city. The heroine quickly completed all matters in the boutique. Arrieta looks for Edwin on the street because she didn't want to see the tailor's work with her own eyes. The heroine decides to wait for the boy in the carriage, but bumps shoulders with a brunette in a blue dress. The stranger apologized and turned out to be an attractive young woman. Confused by so much beauty, Arrieta watched the girl walk away. The heroine met the coachman and asked if he had seen the guy who arrived with her. The girl couldn't get the amazing stranger out of her head. The heroine began to wonder who she was. Unexpectedly, Arrieta thought that even Edwin would fall in love with such beauty. The heroine wanders the street, still embarrassed by thoughts about Edwin. And that stranger. The girl looks around confusedly to finally find the boy and return home. Arrieta doesn't see Edwin, but the lady she recently bumped into. The brunette turns around, and the heroine decides she is looking for something. A stranger stands in the middle of the street and doesn't see a messenger on horseback, rushing towards her from the side. The lady doesn't notice the horse even after the rider shouts a few meters away from her. Arrieta, seeing this, runs towards the girl and knocks her under the horse's hooves. And they fall to the ground together. The messenger galloped away, and the ladies were left on the ground with torn dresses. And dirty. The stranger jumped up and apologized for the fact that the heroine had to suffer and ruin her dress because of her. Arrieta told the girl not to worry because she had jumped without thinking and helped her up. The lady said she owes her life to the heroine and doesn't know how to thank her, so she bows. Arrieta asked what the stranger was looking for, as she was very interested in the search. The stranger says she probably made a mistake, because it's unlikely she saw someone she hadn't seen in so long. The girl finally introduces herself as Vivian and Terich Connell, and the heroine also says her name. Arrieta notices that Vivian's last name sounds familiar. The brunette asks fearfully if her new acquaintance is Mackenzie from Philiotia. The heroine was very surprised that the lady knew her little-known family and their place of residence. Finally, Edwin finds Arrieta, runs up from behind and takes her hand. The boy puts his hands on the girl's shoulders and asks what happened to the heroine. Why wasn't she in the boutique while Viviana watches? Suddenly, Edwin and the lady recognize each other and call each other by name. The girl runs into the Lord's arms and says she missed him very much. Viviana starts crying, looking at the boy's face while he just looks surprised. Arrieta, seeing this scene, finally remembers where she knows the Rich Connell surname from. The heroine remembers all the pain she felt when she learned about her engagement to Lady Rich Connell. The girl moves away from the couple, but Edwin moves away from Vivian to ask his lady what happened. The boy saw that the girl was trembling and could not approach her. Edwin was very surprised by this reaction and simply watched the heroine walk away. Arrieta sits in the carriage and looks out the window, waiting for the journey to begin. The hero sits opposite her, does not dare to say anything, and remembers Viviana. When Edwin first approached her, the girl asked him with a smile why he had appeared. The Lord looked at her thoughtfully, as if he himself didn't know how life had brought him there. It all started when the prince told Edwin and his father about the beautiful daughter that Marquis Rich Connell had. The prince says that Viviana seemed similar to Edwin in her aura. The hero's father states that many people courted the girl, but she has been rejecting everyone for a long time. And his son can try to meet her. Edwin coldly agreed with his father and went to Viviana. At the first meeting, the boy realized that she and the lady were similar in that they put family before their own interests. Edwin kneels and proposes marriage to Viviana, even though it is the first time they meet. The girl accepts the offer without hesitation, saying it is an honor for her. Edwin proposed to a girl he had never seen before because of her noble behavior. Disinterested and proud. Shortly after the engagement, the hero was sent to the border, and a year later he ceased to be Redford. And the engagement was dissolved. Edwin mentally asked Vivian if their relationship was mutually beneficial. Without romantic feelings. The hero caught Arrieta in the yard to finally talk, but the girl asked to talk later. The heroine couldn't look Edwin in the eye, and looking away, lied by saying she was too tired. The boy looked at the lady and realized that she had been avoiding him all day. If Arrieta noticed him, she would ignore him and run away, or turn around and go back. Edwin understood that Viviana was the reason for this behavior, and remembered the meeting in the city. And the lady's reaction to her. The days when a boy cheerfully chatted with a girl are long gone. And now they seem like a thing of the past. Edwin puts his hand to his chest, thinking that Arrieta gave him warmth and he began to appreciate it. But now apparently she is tired of him. The boy, standing in front of Aunt Lillian's house, wonders if the lady wants everything to be as it was. Or if they want to become strangers to each other. Arrieta stretches in her chair after finishing her book and thinks it's time to go to bed. Someone knocks on the door, but she doesn't answer the girl's question about who arrived so late. The heroine once again anxiously asks who came to her. Arrieta remembers that the maid Heather has hearing problems, so she takes the candle and heads to the door. Upon opening the door, the girl saw Edwin in the candlelight and was about to close it. The boy didn't let her do this and held the door with his hand. Edwin said there would have been trouble if someone else had come and opened the door wider. Arrieta stepped further into the room, shouting that the slave didn't understand what he was doing now. But the guy entered. The girl steps away and says she didn't let Edwin in and asks him to leave now. The boy confidently refuses and asks the lady to finally talk to him about Viviana. Arrieta remembers the brilliant lady and says she doesn't want to talk about her now. Edwin asks when the right time will be, because it is important for him to clarify the situation. The slave says, with a cold look, that he wanted to wait for the lady to come to him. But now he can't. The heroine asks him to wait a little longer, but the boy approaches and says he has run out of patience. Arrieta backs away in panic and shouts at the boy not to come closer. Edwin sadly asks if the lady thinks he will hurt her and assures her that he would never harm the girl. The boy advances and the heroine moves away, saying that this is nothing like Edwin's usual behavior. The girl bumps against the wall and the hero, who has cornered her, repeats that he has run out of patience. Arrieta drops the candlestick and closes her eyes, not understanding what is happening. The heroine slowly opens her eyes, and at that moment the boy kneels at her feet. Edwin bows his head and asks her to hit him or call for help if the lady wants. Arrieta is ashamed and surprised, and the boy simply asks her to listen to the fact that nothing happened or can happen between him and Viviana. Edwin says that he was actually engaged to this girl for some time. However, this was only for the good of their families, the Redfords and Rich Connell. The boy swears that nothing happened between them because this happened before he met Arrieta. Still on his knees, Edwin says that even the day he met Viviana, he didn't notice her immediately, because his attention was focused on the lady. The heroine kneels closer to the boy and asks why he is telling her this. Arrieta comments that Edwin's story sounds like an excuse, and the boy agrees because he doesn't want the lady to hate her. The girl lowers her head and asks how one can hate such a guy. The heroine covers her face with her hands and accepts that nothing bad happened and that she didn't avoid meeting the boy because of it. Arrieta, with horror in her eyes and hands over her face, said that she was afraid of herself that day. After all, if he had found out about her thoughts that day, he would definitely have hated her himself. The heroine wondered if Edwin still loved Viviana, and what she should do if he didn't want her returned to Filiach. Arrieta understands that even if he doesn't want to, his sponsors are his family, and the heroine can lock him up and force him to be with her. The girl with anger on her face thinks that she doesn't care what others say, because Edwin belongs to her. The heroine saw her facial expression in the reflection of the window and was horrified to realize her thoughts. Arrieta cries, realizing that she almost did to the boy what cruel people did to him before her. The girl sits timidly in front of the boy, thinking that no matter how much she didn't want to keep her thoughts secret, she should be more honest with him. The heroine burst into tears. It seemed to her that now Edwin would not want to communicate with her. The boy puts his hand on the girl's palm and asks her to look at him. Edwin makes eye contact and tells the lady that he has done nothing wrong and has nothing to apologize for. Arrieta continues to cry and explains that she wanted to limit the boy's freedom, just as she was no different from the people who harassed him. After a short silence, the slave asks the girl to lock him up and torture him if that is what she wants. The boy says he doesn't care if Arrieta does this to him, and she is surprised with tears in her eyes. The girl asks what he is saying, but there is not a drop of doubt on the boy's face. Or a lie. Edwin takes and kisses the lady's hand, saying that he recognized her as his only mistress. Still holding the girl's wrist, the boy asks her never to doubt and to use him as a sworn servant. Later, Arrieta learned that this oath is made by a knight to his master. And although she did not fully understand Edwin's intentions, she understood his emotions. During the tea party, the butler brought Aunt Lillian's seasonal invitations to events. The woman trembles at the letter, which she definitely did not expect to see in the morning mail. Arrieta shows this letter to Edwin and tells him that Rich Connell will invite her to a masquerade ball next week. The boy asks why they were invited. The girl replies that her aunt was also surprised. It is very difficult to get into Rich Connell's events. Not even bribery helps. Arrieta takes a sip of water and says that it is probably thanks to Vivian for saving her that day. The girl supposes that Viviana doesn't want to see her, but someone else from Lillian's house. Edwin remembers that there are no feelings between him and the Marquis's daughter, and the heroine agrees with him. Arrieta timidly admits that she received another letter today. This message was personally written by Lady Viviana to the heroine, but the girl couldn't bring it here because it could fall into the wrong hands. The heroine burned the letter after reading it because it said so. Edwin continued to carry firewood for the fireplace and asked if she needed to know the contents of the letter. The boy says that if the letter does not talk about some danger for Arrieta, he is not interested in the content. The heroine jumps up from her chair and exclaims that the letter contained something important for Edwin. Without distracting himself from his work, the boy says that since the letter is not addressed to him, he will trust the lady in this matter. Arrieta wondered how to convince the slave of the true importance of this information. Finally, the heroine says that Viviana wants to see him, and the invitation was a pretext for this. Edwin looked ahead and said he shouldn't have listened to that. Arrieta says that, in her opinion, the boy should see her, because they couldn't have a normal conversation in advance. The boy interrupts the lady and asks if he should meet Vivian, and the girl freezes. Edwin turns to the heroine and asks if she was the one who was unpleasant last time, or if she has already changed her mind. The guy says he will pretend he didn't hear anything and will leave the room. Arrieta stops the guy with the phrase that Lady Viviana believes that the Redfords could have been unjustly accused. The heroine says that the whole incident with Edwin's family seems strange to the Marquis's daughter. The girl mentioned the count who starred in the uprising, who was sentenced to death after a month in prison. However, Edwin's father, who arranged nothing, was executed 3 days later. And the whole situation is strange. The guy turns around and listens that something terrible is hidden behind the family's execution. Arrieta asked what the hero thought about this, if the whole situation seemed suspicious to him. Edwin says that now he is not sure that he is not interested, because he also noticed a couple of strange things about what happened. The man remembered that the victims were not even given a chance to prove their guilt, as if they simply wanted to erase the family from history. The hero rubbed the bridge of his nose and reasoned that it no longer mattered because it was the king's own decision. The girl remembered that the boy's family had always been loyal to the kingdom, and it didn't seem like Edwin was lying. Arrieta says she cannot abandon the situation and asks the slave to talk to Viviana. Edwin asks if this is an order, which stuns the girl, and she says her words are a request. Arrieta runs around the carriage and waits for Edwin to get dressed inside. The girl understands that she should have prepared more thoroughly and not forced the boy to get ready quickly. The heroine leans against the carriage and asks him to tell her if the mirror she gave him is too small. Edwin says he is ready. He gets out of the carriage and asks her if he looks good. Arrieta remembers how handsome the boy is and says he took her breath away. The girl enthusiastically says she doesn't have enough words to describe how wonderful he is. Edwin gets embarrassed and says the lady is exaggerating, saying that he looks better than her, who spent noon getting ready. The boy asks if the lady likes his appearance and gets the answer that would make any girl blush. Edwin clarifies that he wants to know Arrieta's exact opinion, which surprises the girl. The heroine says with a smile that she, of course, also likes the boy's suit. And that makes him happy. Edwin puts on a mask and invites the girl to go to the ball. Arrieta, with a boy on her arm, arrives at the costume party at Marquis Rich Connell's. The girl is surprised by the scale of the estate because this dacha looks more like a castle. The butler approaches and offers her champagne, and the heroine takes a glass. Arrieta offers a drink to Edwin, but he politely refuses and asks her not to worry about him. The girl is worried that the boy doesn't want to drink before meeting Lady Viviana. The heroine takes off her mask to drink, and Edwin sees the girl's beautiful and embarrassed face. Arrieta is amazed by the first-class alcohol served at the rich people's parties. Edwin turns around and protects the lady from the approaching man. The approaching man says that Lady Viviana wants to see Arrieta and her companion. The boy and the girl were taken to the lady's chambers and entered it. Viviana, sitting in a chair by the window, greeted them and said she was tired of waiting. Edwin closed the door of the room behind him, while Arrieta admired the beauty of the hostess. Viviana thanked the boy for coming, because it must have been difficult for him. The hero asked the lady not to address him formally, because he no longer belongs to the Redford dynasty. Confused, the girl declares that she will be careful, but that she has nothing to hide in this room, especially since they were previously engaged. To eliminate the awkwardness, Arrieta asks for more details about what is known about the Redfords. With a serene smile, Viviana asks to be left alone with Edwin. Arrieta asked again because she didn't understand why she should leave. Edwin said he had nothing to hide from his lady, and if she couldn't be here. Then the conversation wasn't important. Viviana gets up and explains that's not what she meant, but that Arrieta needs to leave for her own safety. The story involves the most powerful people in the kingdom, so the consequences, if anyone finds out about the conversation, will be dire. Arrieta puts her hand to her chest and declares she is willing to take any risk to help Edwin. Viviana affirms that sometimes it is better to remain in ignorance, and if the girl were her person, she would never know. The hostess leaves the decision to Edwin because it will determine his future destiny. The boy thought about it, because a lady wouldn't worry so much about trifles, and he doesn't want to hurt Arrieta. Arrieta decides to leave the slave and the lady after all, and is about to leave the room. And Edwin is already about to leave with her. The girl convinces him that he needs to listen to Vivian, and she will wait for him outside. The heroine leaves, and the boy stays alone with his ex-fiancée. Viviana asked the gentleman to remove his mask, since no one was watching them. The boy obeyed, and the lady said that now they had truly met. The girl thought Edwin had changed a lot, but now she saw the same Lord Redford in front of her. Viviana remembers how she used to wonder if she could ever close the distance between them if she stayed close. The girl, embarrassed, says she didn't expect to have the chance to meet Edwin again. The guy grabs the mask in his hand and asks if they can get straight to the point, as he doesn't have much time. Viviana sits in a chair and asks if Edwin is in a hurry to see Lady Arrieta. The girl realizes that, although she hasn't known the heroine for long, she can conclude that the gentleman is very worried about her. Edwin says the girl is very naive and doesn't understand what she might face. Viviana looks closely at the gentleman, thinking he is no longer the same one she knew. Now she sees an emotional boy in front of her, but she had never seen him worry so much about someone before. Viviana initiated the conversation and told Edwin everything she knew about her family's situation. The boy thanks the girl and believes it wasn't easy to get this information. The hostess says she is helping Edwin for personal reasons. Viviana modestly concludes that helping is a way of saying goodbye to the gentleman. The girl let Edwin go because she herself had to return for vacation, and the boy got up from the table thanking her. Finally, Viviana asked if Arrieta occupied a special place in the gentleman's heart. Confused, Edwin gives a negative answer and heads for the door. The girl smiles, thinking she didn't notice any interesting details about the boy. Lord Edwin turned out to be a terrible liar, because when he put on the mask, he burned with shame. At that moment, Arrieta was enjoying champagne, leaning against the wall of the ballroom. The heroine thinks she acted selfishly by bringing Edwin here, because he didn't want to know the truth. The girl spins a champagne glass by the stem, wondering what kind of person this king is, who is so cruel to the boy. Arrieta walked to the center of the hall, thinking she should follow Vivian's advice and not interfere in this matter. If all doubts are set aside, instead of open confrontation for Edwin, the boy will have to play the role of a slave his whole life. The heroine sadly thinks she can dedicate herself completely to this, if it is necessary to help the boy. The girl is also afraid that the boy will distance himself from her after this whole affair. Arrieta, to get rid of obsessive thoughts, ran down the hall. The girl decided to have another drink and walked towards the buffet without opening her eyes. A stranger came out of the balcony, adjusting his belt, and called someone from there to accompany him. He bumped into Arrieta, and the girl ended up on the floor and her mask fell off. The boy looked at the heroine with disdain and straightened his jacket. A girl ran out from behind the balcony curtain. She called the boy Sean and asked if everything was all right. The girl asked if everything was all right because there was a lot of noise, and Sean asked not to bother him in public. The couple talks about their future wedding, while Arrieta sits on the floor with knee pain. The girl whispers a question to Sean about who the lady in front of them is. The boy smiles because he doesn't know her, which means she is either not local or comes from a discreet family. Only now does the heroine realize that her mask has fallen off, and everyone can see her face. Sean lifts his mask and mockingly asks if this is what the girl is looking for. Arrieta yells at the boy to give her the mask, but he is in no hurry. Sean lifts the girl by the wrist and tells her they are both at fault for not watching the road. The heroine pulls her hand away and declares that if the boy hadn't turned his head, he wouldn't have crashed into the person in front of him. Arrieta says the first thing to check is not the clothes, but the person who fell to the ground. Sean adjusts his jacket again and mocks that his clothes are expensive, unlike the girl's dress. The heroine was stunned by the fact that the aristocrat called her poor. Arrieta also smiled and stated that in Sean's case, it's not the person who wears the clothes, but the clothes. The phrase explaining the guy's rude behavior made Sean flinch. The boy said that the lady simply had no idea who she was talking to, but she interrupted him by saying she wasn't interested. Arrieta also humiliated Sean by pointing out his poorly buttoned shirt. The boy shyly covered his stomach with crooked buttons and didn't know what to say. The heroine says that things are expensive, but apparently the wearer didn't have time to check if he was wearing them correctly. Arrieta also embarrasses the girl and asks what they were having fun doing on the balcony. Sean, furious, finally told the girl to stop. The guy attacked the heroine to hit her in the face. Arrieta covered her face with her hands and closed her eyes, anticipating the blow. The heroine opened her eyes because she didn't feel the blow and saw Edwin in front of her. Sean, perplexed, asked who the guy was, but the guy didn't answer. Edwin squeezed the stranger's wrist tightly, so much so that he screamed. The slave pressed the guy's throat against the wall with his hand, and Sean screamed that he didn't dare behave like that. Arrieta asked Edwin to stop, and he obediently took his hands off the guy. Sean looked at the stranger's face to understand who was hiding behind the mask. The boy saw the eyes of the blonde man behind the mask, hoping to recognize him by them. Sean realized with fear that the eyes of the masked guy looked very familiar to him. Edwin and Arrieta ran away to get away from Sean and stopped in the garden. The heroine yelled at the boy, asking what he was thinking, because if it weren't for the mask, people would have recognized him. The guy took off his mask and said he no longer cared if he was recognized. Arrieta is indignant at Edwin's actions because people can see. The boy took the girl's hand, brought it to his chest, and confidently said he really didn't care. The hero placed his hands on Arrieta's neck and asked if that stranger had hurt her. The girl moved away from the boy and said that something completely different was important now. Edwin asked if the lady really thought he would stand still when she was almost hit. Arrieta claims that nothing bad would have happened because a couple of blows wouldn't kill her. The boy yells how she can say such terrible things. Edwin is horrified and asks if the girl really thinks a couple of blows won't kill her. The girl corrects herself by saying she doesn't care if she gets hurt, but it will be bad if the boy is recognized. After all, then people will resort to severe punishment, because Edwin, as a slave, threatened a noble. The girl trembles and says the boy could be whipped, have his hands cut off, and feet or even killed. The heroine freezes at the terrible things she just said out loud, and the boy insists he doesn't care. Edwin says that if anyone touches Arrieta, he will break the aggressor's neck, no matter who it is. The heroine covers the boy's mouth with her palms and asks him to stop talking about this topic. The girl says she is afraid someone will overhear their conversation, and the boy falls silent. Arrieta, still covering Edwin's mouth, thinks he is different from how she imagined him when they met. In the first meeting with the girl, he seemed very cold, and she doesn't understand where this burning rage comes from. Arrieta suddenly realizes that she is the reason for the changes in the boy's character. The girl pushes the boy, who doesn't understand anything, away from her and looks at his beautiful face. The heroine stands on tiptoes, wraps her arms around Edwin's neck, and thinks that only today will she allow herself to do this. Arrieta leans in to kiss the boy and mentally asks if she can at least be honest with her feelings today. The couple hears a crack behind them. Someone is walking towards them in the darkness. The girl shyly moves away from Edwin and turns around. It turns out the whisper came from a midnight bird that decided to fly off the branch at that moment. Arrieta clutches her head and realizes what she was about to do. The boy turns to the lady and asks what she wanted to do with him now. Suddenly, the butler runs in and says he has a message from Viviana. And Edwin hurries to put on his mask. The servant said that the lady advised him to leave the ball as soon as possible and stay away from here. This is because one of the famous guests is extremely angry, and Vivian is worried that the guests might get into trouble. Arrieta calls Edwin and tells him it's time for them to leave the event. The boy, without looking up or asking questions, nodded to the lady. The carriage with the lady and the slave hastily left the Marquis's estate. Arrieta thought everything was fine, and no one recognized Edwin, although Sean almost ruined everything. The girl turns her head, driving away thoughts and convincing herself that she won't see him again anyway. Edwin silently watched the lady's actions, not understanding her, while she thought about how clumsy and stupid she had behaved in the garden. Lillian nervously fanned herself, thinking about her wish for Arrieta to marry a gentleman from a good family. However, she did not expect to see such a famous figure as Sean among the suitors. Heir to the Duchy of Ravani. The aunt rushes around the room, wondering what Arrieta is doing, since first there was an invitation from the rich Connell family, and then a visit to Ravani. The heroine, sitting at the reception, is nervous and stares intently at her interlocutor, asking him how he found her house. Sean, leaning back on the sofa, mockingly replies that it was as easy as peeling pears. The boy says he knows a lot about the girl, and she, gritting her teeth, notes how cheeky he is for approaching her after trying to hit her. Sean is surprised because he thinks Arrieta deserved the blow. Even though he was drunk, it's her fault. The boy smiles rudely because the girl doesn't realize that his presence should be an honor for her. Arrieta crosses her arms over her chest and asks, in that case, to leave a fool like her alone. Sean smiles crazily and says he can't leave because the heroine has what he needs. The guy asks where the rude man who almost strangled him at the ball is. Arrieta is surprised, but understands that under no circumstances should Edwin be given a title. The girl asks how he knows this, and the guest crosses his legs and pretends to be surprised. The heroine lies that the boy simply protected her, but she had never met him before, and laughs that Sean came just for that. The guy rolls his eyes and says if he really has to believe it. Arrieta is afraid that her deception was successful, and Sean turned out not to be so stupid. Finally, the heroine was surprised by the fact that the guest said the gentleman's full name. Edwin Benedict de Vere Redford. Sean looked intimidatingly at the heroine, saying once again that lying was useless because he already knew everything. The image of the boy getting up from the sofa floats in Arrieta's eyes, and the girl is still trying to figure out how to lie. Sean stands behind the frightened heroine, rubs his hand, and says he will have to resort to another method. The boy shrugged and smiled at the fact that the arrogant Redford was serving someone like this girl as a master. He wasn't even recognizable. Arrieta screams that Sean is wrong and that she is not Edwin's master. The guest says he doubts it because Edwin probably thinks differently. Sean says that the gentleman's disappearance from the capital turned the capital upside down because many people wanted to buy such a slave. At first, people thought the guy had run away, but his then-owner remained silent. And the information was not revealed even for a lot of money. And the countess fell ill because she was happy to have the man of her dreams as a slave. And in the end, she stayed with her former husband. Sean says that only a fool like the count would lose control of his wife. The boy remembers Lady Viviana and says that maybe he is the same. Sean, hysterically, asks how such a slave could reach the Viscount's daughter, and where he is now. Arrieta begs them to leave Edwin alone. She wants to apologize for that night and asks him to remember her old friendship with the gentleman. Sean screams in anger because the girl called her relationship with the slave friendship. The anger is so strong that the boy punches the wall as hard as he can and tells the frightened girl that Redford makes him sick. Sean concludes, gritting his teeth, that he hates Edwin. The guy says he doesn't feel sorry for the gentleman, that he has never felt so free, and that he himself would brand the slave if he had the chance. Arrieta moves away from the madman and is surprised that he can say such a thing. Sean finishes off the girl knowing that the slave voluntarily abandoned Filiach. The heroine is surprised by how much this boy knows. She tries to say something. Sean reveals that the last runaway slave had his ankles cut off and was left to be eaten by wild animals. And Arrieta panics. Realizing the danger from the guest, the girl started crying and knelt in front of the boy, begging him not to touch Edwin. Arrieta hears a noise and turns to see who entered the room at that moment. An angry Edwin runs into the hall and Sean smiles and asks if he should call him by his name or by his slave number. The guest approaches the slave who called him sir and touches him, calling him 11,542. Sean punches the hero in the face, causing him to grab his nose. Arrieta runs and stands between the boys, protecting the slave and asking what is happening. Sean smugly declared that he could not tolerate the insolence of a slave calling a noble sir. The heroine, with tears in her eyes, said that this guy is the worst person in the world. Sean said he could have cut the guy's tongue, while Edwin wiped the blood from his mouth. The guest, enjoying this scene, said how funny life is, that the once revered noble became a slave. Sean remembered how his father told him about Edwin's success, who would soon be promoted to commander of the royal guard. He also remembered Viviana, who enthusiastically told him that she had married Redford without knowing him. Then Sean's hands trembled, because he had spent so many years by the lady's side, giving her his heart. Sean was drinking at the ball while listening to someone congratulate Edwin on his engagement. The boy cunningly asked how the gentleman won Viviana's heart, since she rejected everyone. Sean was trembling with anger, because Edwin said they simply thought the marriage was beneficial. That he didn't even think she was beautiful. The guy is furious, because the gentleman so easily got what he desperately wanted. Sean wants to leave, but loses control of his legs. He stumbles and falls in front of everyone. Before getting up, Edwin approaches him and tells him that Lord Sean should leave so as not to disturb the others. Sean approaches Arrieta and the boy, saying that no matter how much he mocked before, now he is just a slave. The guest abruptly took the girl's hand, pulled her and told her to move. Because he wanted to deal with the slave. Edwin intercepts his hand, brings it to his chest, and asks the gentleman not to touch the lady. Sean withdraws his hand and asks if the slave will hit him if he touches the girl, and how he dares to threaten the heir to the duchy. Arrieta asks the boys to stop, but is afraid to approach them. Sean, smiling, says he wasn't sure if he saw Edwin at the ball, because he shouldn't be on the band sick. The heroine asks why the boy cannot be outside his house in Filiash. Sean recalls that the Redfords were executed for treason, and that the son of a traitor cannot walk free without supervision. The guest talks about 3 conditions under which Marquis Knight handed the slave over to Arrieta's father. The first rule was that you had to report Edwin's every move at least once a month. The second stated that the slave could not be transferred to anyone for the next 30 years. And the third is that Edwin must not be allowed to leave the town under any circumstances. Sean says that Arrieta's father recently sent a false report because it said everything was fine. The guy assumes that she doesn't understand what threatens her if Marquis Knight and the Crown Prince find out about the violation of the conditions. And if the king, who still considers the slave a threat, finds out, his anger will take hold not only of Edwin, but of Arrieta's entire family. The girl cries, puts her hands on Sean's chest, who approached her, and begs him to keep everything a secret. The heroine asks if the boy wants her to apologize on her knees, but he just pushes her away and gets indignant. Sean says that in that case, Edwin should kneel. Arrieta, in the boy's arms, begs him to let her be the one to humble herself. The hero releases the girl, kneels before the master, and asks him to fulfill his lady's request. Sean enjoys this scene, watching the slave's humiliation and the fear in the girl's eyes. The gentleman yells at the guy to get down and presses his head with his foot. Sean presses even harder, so that Edwin hits his face against the carpet. Arrieta runs to the boy and throws herself on the floor to help him up. Sean leaves, not noticing the broken vase and telling the slave to remember where his place is. Edwin asks Arrieta to look at him, while she sits on the floor with her head buried in her knees. The lady raises her tearful eyes and examines the boy. The girl notices the hero's unbuttoned shirt, and on his open chest is a slave mark with the number 11,542. Arrieta is overwhelmed with emotional pain and sincerely apologizes to Edwin for going to the ball and confronting Sean because of her. The girl cries because she is useless and cannot protect him, and the slave says she is not to blame. Edwin wanted to touch the heroine, but withdrew his hand, remembering Sean's words about where he belonged. The boy tells Arrieta that she cries that he doesn't care, and that he would do anything for her. Sean gets angry and throws things, saying that Vivian should be grateful that he saved her from being labeled as the traitor's fiancé. The lady, angry, reminds him that the gentleman promised not to touch Edwin if he accepted his offer. Sean wondered how she knew, since he made sure no one knew about his visit. The butler enters the room and says the Duke wants to see the boy. Sean's father reveals that Belisha asked Brimdell for a diplomatic marriage, and the king is worried about this. The boy doesn't understand the problem, because Belisha is a more developed country and the marriage will be a success. The Duke explains that, for their part, they nominated Prince Bernard. Bernard Sansel Shane Pascourt is the second son of the king of Belisha, known as a womanizer and a fighter. He constantly flirts with women, and due to his temper, he became famous for being able to grab a sword in every detail, which is why he is nicknamed the Prince of Disasters. The Duke says that the king cannot marry Princess Lesha, known throughout Brimdal for her beauty and intelligence, to such a tyrant. But it is impossible to refuse, because the people of Custon in the north are behaving suspiciously. And there is no time for marriage games. The Duke suggests it would be good if the king had an illegitimate daughter. Sean suggests simply inventing a princess, but if the deception is revealed, the anger of Belisha cannot be avoided. The boy reminds his father of his influence and convinces him that if something goes wrong, they and their contacts will easily silence the situation. The Duke asks if his son has someone in mind, since with such audacity he offers a replacement. And Sean remembers his new acquaintance, Arrieta. The heroine approaches Hugo from behind, swinging on a swing tied to a tree branch. A few days ago, the girl received a letter from Filios. After reading it, she immediately went home. Mom was surprised, and then burst into tears when she saw her daughter. But her father was not at home. He left on business as soon as he wrote the letter. The Viscount's wife cried a lot because Hugo would have to fulfill military service at his age. The boy, wiping his eyes, turns around when his sister calls him. Hugo smiles, asks the heroine where she comes from, and tells her how much he missed her. The girl places her hand on her brother's head and tells him she knows what awaits him. And the boy freezes. Hugo says with a fake smile that after he goes to the border, they will see each other less often. Arrieta is horrified to learn that they will send her brother to the town of Bangola, which is currently at war. The boy asks his sister not to worry, because service is his chance to prove himself. Hugo enthusiastically says he will give his all and bring glory to the Mackenzie family. The heroine's brother begins to tremble. He says he will definitely return to Filiosh and admits that he is still afraid. Arrieta sits down and takes Hugo's hands while he says he is not as brave as his sister, but simply a coward. The boy trembles and cries, admitting that he does not want to die. Edwin sees this sad scene and understands who is responsible for what happened. Arrieta is with the guy behind the barn and tells him that the situation needs to be corrected, and that she cannot let Hugo go to war. The girl cries and asks Edwin why this happened. The hero says that the king's orders are undeniable. Not even a noble can evade them. Perhaps there is still hope, because the king has the right to cancel his order. Edwin approaches the boy in the garden and thanks him for responding to his request at that time. Lord Edwin realizes that they haven't seen each other in a long time and asks how the slave is. He asks if he should apologize, because Edwin has suffered a lot and is probably disappointed in the gentleman. The slave bows to Edwin with his hand on his chest. He says he is not offended and asks him not to address him so formally because he has lost his title. The gentleman says he was surprised that the boy approached him with a request, and Edwin asks for a favor. The guy says that the son of Viscount Mackenzie, his master, was recruited into the army. But he is not ready to go to the front yet. Duong says that Custon's warriors crossed the border, and they had to gather troops urgently. So many were called up. The gentleman informs that there is no need to worry, because the knights are not sent to fight, but are assigned to an office not far from the capital. Edwin explains that they will send Hugo to Bangola, and that he is only 12 years old. Duong is surprised that they are sending a child under 16 to the front, because it is strange. The slave bows and thanks the gentleman for agreeing to do his best. Duong realizes that the boy has changed a lot in those years, as he is very worried about the boy's fate. The hero looks up when the gentleman asks him if this is his only request. Duong is surprised that Edwin turned to Marquima Knight for help in conveying his request. The boy remembered how he asked the Marquis for help if he knew the name Saranac, and the prophecies she made. Duong asks if Edwin wants to know about Saranac and how he knows about her prophecy. The gentleman remembers Viviana and says he doesn't care how Paradise finds out about this. Duong covers his face with his hand and admits that he didn't want to see Edwin because he was very afraid to see his reflection in his eyes. The gentleman says he couldn't resist the prophecy and the cleansing, but his apology will be useless. Duong asks Edwin to ask him what he wants, and believes he will ask about the fall of the Redfords. The boy suddenly says he has no questions because the gentleman correctly said that it is useless. Even if the truth is revealed, nothing will change. Duan says that no one will believe that the great family collapsed because of some prophecy. People called her Saranac. No one knew if it was a first name or a last name. She appeared suddenly and became close to the royal family. And she didn't appear in public for a long time, so it was just a rumor for people. Saranac has never been wrong, and Duan's father, the king, blindly believes everything she says. The king no longer controls Brimdal. He is just a puppet in the hands of this fortune teller.